he called me a traitor. Right there on stage in front of 1,000 veterans and live television cameras. Senator Alan Prescott pointed his finger at my chest and accused me of betraying my country. But he didn't know the truth I carried in my hand, the photographs, the field notes, the blood-stained dog tag of a child, no older than 10. For 50 years I stayed silent about what we did in Quang Binh, about the massacre they called a mission, about the orders Prescott gave that turned soldiers into executioners. But silence doesn't heal. It haunts. And I came back not for revenge, but to finally tell America the story it buried under medals and lies. Because I was there. I saw everything. And now the world will too. He pointed straight at me, his voice booming through the loudspeakers like a gunshot splitting open an old wound, and called me a traitor. This man, he shouted, stood against his own brothers in arms. He betrayed the uniform. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a slow-moving shockwave. Veterans in dress blues turned to stare. Reporters spun their cameras toward me as if I had just detonated a bomb in the middle of the Veterans Memorial Hall. My name was still echoing in the background, Thomas McLean, as the banner behind the speaker flapped in the summer wind, its patriotic stars and stripes suddenly looking like accusations instead of pride. I stood frozen, the heat of 1,000 eyes burning into my skin. And yet, I didn't flinch, because I had known this day would come. I had walked into that ceremony with a folder in my hand, and 50 years of silence packed inside it like a live grenade. I had once worn the same uniform as the man now pointing his finger at me. Brigadier General turned Senator Alan Prescott, a decorated war hero with a smile that had won elections and hidden sins. But behind his gleaming medals were secrets that smelled like napalm and blood. And I was the last man alive who could testify to them. The crowd was rising to its feet not to applaud, but to leave. Some booed. Others simply looked away. A young reporter shoved a mic in my face. "Sir, are the allegations true? Were you involved in the Zhang Hoi operation?" Her voice cracked more eager than angry. I looked at her, maybe 24 born, 3 decades after the war ended, yet about to carry its legacy in a headline she didn't yet understand. I didn't answer her. Instead, I looked at Prescott. His eyes, once coldly amused behind bulletproof aviators in the Vietnamese jungle, now radiated panic beneath perfectly coiffed white hair. For the first time in years, I saw him blink like a man realizing the ghost he buried didn't stay dead. I had come to the ceremony because he was being honored for lifetime service. They said it would be symbolic. A flag, a speech, a plaque. They said old ghosts shouldn't be dug up, that peace meant forgetting. But they were wrong. Peace means justice. Peace means the truth, especially when the truth is inconvenient. I clutched the folder tighter. Inside were photographs, field notes, 2 letters written by a medic who never came home, and a blood-stained dog tag. Mine. They'd tried to erase me from history once. I had the scars to prove it, but I didn't die in that rice paddy. And I didn't stay quiet. When the Veterans Council invited me, I had written undecided on the RSVP. I wasn't sure if I could stand on that stage and look into the eyes of men who had no idea what had really happened in March of 1972. I wasn't sure if I'd collapse halfway through or vomit my truth all over a flag-draped podium. But the moment I saw Prescott's face on the event flyer, smiling beside the words, "Truth, Honor, Valor," I knew I had to come. Not for revenge, not for glory, for the boy I once was, for the villagers who never got names, for the silence that had lasted too long, They tried to drown my voice in that moment. Prescott cut the microphone and motioned for security. Two men in suits approached me from either side like shadows rising in the midday sun. But I didn't move. I held the folder in the air and shouted, "You know what happened in Quang Binh, Alan." You were there, and the room hushed, as if the word Quang Binh held a secret code only the guilty understood. His face paled. The cameras rolled. Someone whispered, "What's Quang Binh?" The silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was thunder restrained. I was born in 1949 in Breathitt County, Kentucky, raised on cornbread and coal dust. I was 17 when I lied about my age to join the Army. I believed in flags and freedom, but war isn't what they tell you. It isn't black and white. It's blood and noise, and orders you pray are right. In Quang Binh, we weren't soldiers. We were wolves in a village made of straw. That day, I watched mothers fall with babies in their arms. I watched my commanding officer, Prescott, order the fire, and when I tried to stop it, they said I was confused, that I was shell-shocked, that I was unstable. They sent me home. No medals, no questions, no honor. I became a ghost, and now, 50 years later, the man who gave that order was being called a national treasure. I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted to stop the lie. Because if America truly believed in honor, it had to reckon with the stains behind its stars. And if I had to be the villain in his story to make the truth seen, so be it. The guards grabbed my arms, but before they could drag me out, a voice came from the crowd. Fragile, raspy. Let him speak. I turned. An old man in a wheelchair wearing a tattered 101st Airborne cap rolled forward. His name tag read Luis Ortega. My heart skipped. Ortega had been the radio man in our unit. I thought he'd died at Firebase Russell, but he was here, and he was nodding. Prescott's hand trembled. He reached for the mic, but the councilman beside him hesitated. "Senator," the man said quietly, "if what he says is false, let him prove it." That was the moment the balance shifted, from power to proof, from memory to history. I took the stage not to scream, not to rage, but to remember. I opened the folder, and America listened. Maybe for the first time, because the truth doesn't die in jungles. It just waits for someone to carry it home. I wasn't born brave. I was born barefoot in a creaking wooden house nestled between two ridges in Breathitt County, Kentucky. My daddy was a coal miner who came home blackened and broken most nights. And my mama was the kind of woman who prayed before every meal and again after every thunderstorm. We didn't have much, just land that barely grew corn, a rusted Ford truck that coughed worse than Grandpa, and the radio that played Hank Williams through the long winters. But there was a kind of dignity in that life, even if it didn't come with money or medals. We called it pride, and we held on to it like a shield against the world. I was 16 the first time I saw a soldier in uniform up close. He came home from Vietnam on a Greyhound bus, tall and lean with a medal on his chest and a 1,000-yard stare that made him look 50. His name was Ray McGuire. He'd grown up 2 hollers over, and when the preacher introduced him at church, folks clapped like he was a movie star. I watched him from the back pew, unable to blink. He was everything I wasn't: confident, worldly, touched by something greater than the mountains we'd always known. I walked up to him after service and asked, "What's it like out there?" He looked down at me and said 6 words I never forgot, louder than hell. Quieter than death. 2 months later, I forged my birth certificate and enlisted. It wasn't courage that pushed me. It was hunger. hunger for something more than hauling hay and scrubbing grease off broken tractors, hunger for meaning, for escape, for a reason to matter. They gave me a buzz, cut, a uniform, and a rifle. At Fort Polk, Louisiana, I learned how to march, how to shoot, how to say yes, sir, even when my legs were shaking. I learned how to make my bed tighter than a coffin lid and how to disassemble an M16 blindfolded. But no one taught us what to do when the bullets didn't come from the enemy, but from orders that made no sense. They shipped me to Vietnam in the summer of '68. I was 18, wide-eyed and sweating through my boots the moment I stepped off the plane in Da Nang. The heat hit like a fist. The air stank of smoked fish sauce and fear. And yet there was beauty too, the green of the jungle, the distant chants of monks, the faces of children who didn't yet know they should be afraid of us. I was assigned to Echo Company, 3rd Battalion. We called ourselves the Ghost Dogs. Most of us were kids from nowhere, Arkansas, Ohio, Alabama. There was Luis Ortega, the radio man who could mimic Elvis and cried when no one was looking. There was Jimmy Tanner, black as coal, and the fastest runner I'd ever seen. There was Doc Hartley, barely 22, but already stitched up more wounds than a small-town hospital. And there was our CO, Lieutenant Prescott, tall, clean-cut, and already drunk on his own authority. From day one, Prescott strutted like a man auditioning for a monument. "We're here to win hearts and minds," he'd bark, "but if the hearts don't beat for us, we crush them." He was smart, too smart. Knew how to write reports that made slaughter sound strategic. Knew how to flash a smile for the Pentagon brass when they visited. Knew how to reward loyalty and erase dissent. To most of the guys he was a leader. To me, he was a storm in a uniform. The first month was mostly patrols through rice paddies and bamboo thickets, the mud swallowing our boots with every step. We rarely saw the enemy, but we felt them. Tripwires, ghost snipers, whispers in the trees. It was like fighting shadows. Then came the missions. Night raids, village sweeps, and something called recon by fire, a nice way of saying, shoot first, check later. I remember one night in particular. We were stationed near a hamlet called Poo Lock, a cluster of huts with nothing but women, children, and old men. Prescott got intel unverified that Viet Cong had moved through. Torch protocol, he ordered. I blinked. "Sir," he looked me dead in the eye. "Set it alight." We don't leave enemy resources standing. I froze. These weren't combatants. These were farmers. There were chickens clucking in the mud, babies crying in the dark. My hand hovered over the ignition cap. Then Ortega behind me whispered, "Tommy, don't do it." But Prescott heard. He spun, yanked Ortega by the collar, and shouted, "You question me again, I'll have you court-martialed." And then he lit the fire himself. The sky burned red that night. Screams carried for miles. That was the night I stopped believing in the war. But I didn't stop serving. Not yet, because when you're a soldier, they train obedience deeper than your bones. Disobey, and you're not just a rebel, you're a liability, a threat, a target. So I kept moving, kept nodding, kept writing down orders with shaking hands. But inside, something had started to splinter. I kept a journal, small, leather-bound. I didn't write in it every day, just on the days I couldn't sleep. I sketched faces I couldn't forget. Wrote down coordinates of operations that never made it into official records. And I kept one photograph, a blurry Polaroid of a girl maybe 6, standing in front of her burning home, her eyes looking straight into the lens. That photo stayed in my shirt pocket until the day I left Vietnam. It still smells like smoke. By 1972, the war was dragging. Morale was low. And then came Quang Binh. They told us it was a strategic disruption mission, but we knew better. No one wanted to talk about it. Not before. Not after. That's when everything changed. But that's for the next chapter. Because Quang Binh didn't just kill villagers. It killed who I was. And when I came home, they told me to forget. But I remembered every damn thing. They told us it was recon. That word again, so clean, so technical, so harmless. Standard recon sweep, Prescott said, standing in front of the map with a pointer like he was teaching geography instead of plotting death. Village 14. Possible VC supply chain. No confirmed combatants. He looked at each of us with that plastic grin. In and out. You know the drill. We all nodded. Because that's what you do. You nod. You lace your boots. You clean your weapon. You pretend your stomach isn't turning itself inside out. It was March 17th, 1972. The rain had stopped, but the air was so thick with humidity you could chew it. I remember the smell, wet thatch gun oil, and the faint sweetness of ripe bananas from a nearby grove. We loaded up into 2 M113s, our faces smeared with camo and our orders scribbled in ink that would bleed the moment truth touched it. They called it Village 14. We never learned its real name. To us it was a grid reference. XJ4923. A collection of huts strung together by mud paths surrounded by rice paddies and palm trees that swayed like they knew something we didn't. The intelligence claimed it was a way station for Viet Cong units moving through Quang Binh province. But when we arrived, we found no weapons, no fighters, just families. An old man was the first to greet us. He raised his hands slowly, saying something in Vietnamese I couldn't understand. A boy no older than 8 stood behind him barefoot and holding a stick like a toy rifle. The women peeked out from doorways, their eyes wide, unsure. It should have ended there. It should have stopped. But Prescott's voice cracked over the radio sweep. Burn. No mercy. I looked at Ortega. He looked at me. Then at Doc Hartley, who was already shaking his head. Sir, there's nothing here, I said into my radio. No hostiles. Just civilians. Silence. Then the reply, execute the order, private. Or, stand down and be replaced. He didn't mean reassigned. He meant court-martialed, blacklisted. Maybe even a bullet in the dark when no one was looking. A squad from 1st Platoon kicked open the nearest hut. Screaming erupted. A baby wailed. Someone fired a warning shot. That's all it took. The rest of the unit moved in like a wave crashing over a sandcastle. Men yelling. Mothers grabbing their children. Chickens flapping in terror. I stood frozen. My rifle hung useless in my hands. This wasn't war. This was butchery. Then I saw her. A girl in a white dress with blue flowers, maybe 10, sprinting across the open clearing toward the tree line. Her dress billowed behind her like a flag of surrender. Behind her, a soldier raised his weapon. No, I shouted. Too late. The shot rang out sharp and final. She collapsed in the mud face first. I ran to her, dropped to my knees. Her dress soaked red. Her eyes glassy, staring up at nothing. A blue flower clung to the hem of her skirt, untouched by the blood. I couldn't breathe. Behind me, flames roared as thatched roofs caught fire. The sky turned black with smoke. A woman screamed until her voice broke. I saw Doc Hartley holding a child's body in his arms, tears cutting lines through the grime on his face. I saw Ortega vomit behind a hut. And Prescott stood at the edge of the chaos like a conductor watching his orchestra, proud and distant. He had no expression, just a notepad. When it was over, the village was gone. Charred. Erased. We counted 43 bodies, but I knew there were more buried under rubble. No weapons found, no enemy casualties. Just a report that read enemy infrastructure neutralized. No friendly losses. I refused to sign it, so Prescott rewrote it without me. Later that night, I sat in the jungle beside a stream, my boots off my feet blistered and soaked. The stars above mocked me. I opened my journal and drew the girl's dress from memory. Blue flowers. I wrote her age. Estimated. No name. I knew then that I couldn't stay silent forever. But I also knew I couldn't speak yet. Because after Quang Binh, I wasn't a soldier anymore. I was a witness. And witnesses don't get medals. They get erased. The next week, I was transferred to a supply unit. No explanation. No goodbye. Ortega gave me a look that said everything fear, guilt, sorrow. I kept my head down and followed orders, packed crates, logged inventory, watched the war from the sidelines like a ghost. Then, on the day of my departure, a brown envelope was slipped under my bunk mattress. Inside were 3 photos, grainy, shaky, taken from the tree line. They showed the fires, the civilians, a girl in a white dress. No note, just proof. Doc Hartley never spoke to me again. Ortega wrote me once in '73. Said he was out, back in New Mexico, working construction. He never mentioned the photos, but I knew they came from him, and I kept them. Along with the dog tag, I pulled off that little girl's brother, the one who died, trying to shield her. Back home, I tried to forget, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw blue flowers turning red. When the plane touched down in San Francisco, I expected someone to meet me. Not with fanfare, just someone. A uniform, a clipboard. A question maybe, how was the war son? But no one came. I stepped off that aircraft invisible. Just another young man with eyes too old for his face, carrying a duffel bag heavier than his body, and a silence heavier than truth. I passed civilians who flinched when they saw the uniform. I heard the whispers, baby killer, mercenary, murderer. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. Because part of me believed them. Part of me had seen too much to pretend they were wrong. I took a bus east, then another, until I reached the edge of Breathitt County. My mama opened the door and nearly collapsed from crying. My daddy didn't say much, just nodded and handed me a plate of beans and cornbread. I sat at the same kitchen table where I'd once dreamed of escape, and I couldn't taste a thing. The house looked smaller. The world, too. I stayed for 2 weeks, then left. Said I needed to find work. Truth was, the hills felt too loud with memories. I drifted. From Louisville to Pittsburgh, I worked odd jobs, loading docks, janitor shifts, even pumping gas for a while. Anything where I didn't have to talk. Anything where I could keep my head down and my thoughts locked tight behind my teeth. Nightmares followed me everywhere. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, hearing screams that weren't real anymore. I stopped sleeping. I started drinking. Some nights, the bottle helped me forget. Most nights, it only made the ghosts louder. Then, one afternoon, I saw him. I was mopping the marble floors of the federal building in D.C., a job I took under a fake name because my real one got flagged too often when I looked up and saw a man in a navy blue suit step out of an elevator. Tall, silver hair-polished, smile medals on his chest. My stomach dropped. It was him, Prescott. He didn't recognize me. Why would he? I was just a janitor with a mop in one hand and a bucket in the other. He passed me like I was part of the floor, but I saw the pin on his lapel, Senate candidate Virginia, 1988. I dropped the mop. I should have walked away. I should have gone back to my corner of anonymity and left the past where it rotted. But I couldn't. That night, I unlocked the wooden trunk I hadn't opened in 15 years. Inside were the photos, the journal, the envelope Ortega sent, the dog tag. I touched each piece like it was a wound I had tried to let scar over. I knew what I had to do, but I didn't know how. So I started small. I wrote a letter to a local reporter named Melissa Greer, whose articles I had seen in the Washington Gazette. She wrote about veterans' corruption, and once published a piece that made a local mayor resign. I told her everything well almost. I left out my name, signed it "A Witness," and mailed it from a box 3 counties over. She didn't respond. A week later, I sent another envelope, this time with one of the photos, the one with the girl in the white dress. No letter, just an arrow pointing to her face and the words, "Find her name." Still nothing. Then, 3 days after that, someone knocked on my door. It was her, Melissa Greer. She wore jeans, a gray coat, and eyes that didn't flinch when I opened the door. She said, "I know who you are, and I'm not here to exploit you. I'm here because I believe you." I didn't invite her in. I just stepped back and let her walk through the dust and silence of my rented room. We sat at the kitchen table where I ate canned beans and tried not to feel things. I poured coffee. She didn't touch it. She said, "The story you told, it's not the first I've heard. But it's the first with proof." I didn't respond. She leaned forward. "Why now?" I looked out the window. The street lamp flickered. "Because the man who gave that order is about to sit in a chair that decides what this country remembers. And I can't let that happen." She stayed for 2 hours, took notes, photocopied documents, promised she'd be careful. A week later, she called me. Her voice shook. "They're watching me," she whispered. 2 men parked outside my apartment. "My editor says we can't run it. Says it's national security." I felt it again. The same silence. The same machinery working to bury the truth. "They'll erase you too," I said. She hesitated. "Then, unless we go bigger." I didn't understand. We take it live. A documentary. A live testimony. Broadcast. Unfiltered. I told her no. Too dangerous. But she didn't back down. "You say you want peace. Peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from confrontation." She left me with a burner phone and a date, July 4th. Symbolic. Explosive. Then she disappeared. For 3 weeks I didn't hear from her. I assumed the worst. Then the mail came. Inside was a press pass, a folder, and a single line written on a sticky note. "You ready to tell the world what really happened in Quang Binh?" And for the first time in half a century, I was. It sat in the corner of the closet for 37 years. A weathered oak box with iron latches and a rusted padlock that hadn't been opened since Reagan was in office. I used to call it the coffin, because that's what it was, a tomb of everything I buried to survive. Every memory I couldn't speak. Every image I couldn't destroy. Every ghost I tried to ignore. I swore I'd never open it. I even told myself I'd take it with me to the grave. But then came Melissa's note. "You ready to tell the world what really happened in Quang Binh?" The answer wasn't yes. It was, "I have no choice." I took a crowbar to the lock. It snapped with a metallic groan as if the box itself had resisted. Inside were things that shouldn't have survived time photos sealed in plastic sleeves, pages of my old journal, still smelling of mildew and smoke-blood-stained dog tags and the small Polaroid of the girl in the white dress. Her eyes still stared into mine, unchanged, unforgiving, as if to say, I waited, and now you will speak. I laid everything on my kitchen table like an offering. I catalogued each item as if I were building a case in court, because that's what it would become a trial. Not legal, but moral, public, relentless. I scanned the photographs, digitized the pages. Melissa coached me over secure calls. We used fake names, private servers, VPNs. I didn't even know what half of that meant, but I trusted her. She was half my age and twice as brave. This won't just shake things, she said one night, her voice cracking through the line. It'll split the ground open. Good, because truth doesn't whisper. It erupts. She booked a studio outside Baltimore neutral ground independent media. Not the big networks. They were too scared. Too owned. But this crew, they believed. They'd seen the footage, heard my tapes. Melissa played them a recording I'd made on an old reel-to-reel Ortega's voice, cracking, weeping, whispering the names of the dead. It wasn't clear. It wasn't clean. But it was real. The night before the shoot, I didn't sleep. I sat in a motel room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the air conditioner buzz like a dying cicada. I thought about running, about disappearing. Again, but I couldn't, not after what I saw on the news. Senator Alan Prescott, smiling beside the president, talking about national values, pledging to redefine American heroism. They played old clips, him saluting in a jungle reading bedtime stories to orphans on campaign ads. He had rebranded the war, made it palatable, marketable, and now he was being vetted for Secretary of Defense. That was the last straw. I showed up at the studio an hour early. Melissa handed me a black coffee and squeezed my arm. You don't have to read a script, she said. Just talk. Just be human. They powdered my face, mic'd my collar. A dozen lights hung from the ceiling, too hot, too close. The cameraman counted down. 3, 2, 1. And I began. I told the story from the beginning. My enlistment, my naivety, the heat in Da Nang, the confusion, the silence. I described the night in Pulak, the girl in the white dress, the screams, the fire. I named names. I showed maps, reports, orders signed by Prescott. I read from my journal, we set fire to innocence and called it intel. I showed the photo of the child, but I didn't cry. I didn't yell, because truth doesn't need volume. It needs precision. When it ended, no one clapped. The director leaned back pale. Melissa's eyes glistened. This will burn everything down, she said. Then let it, I whispered. Some forests need fire before they can grow. The next day they aired it. Not on cable, not on TV, online. They titled it simply, The Witness What Really Happened in Quang Binh. It spread like a virus. Within hours, it hit 500,000 views. Then, 1 million. Veterans messaged from everywhere, some angry, some grateful, most shocked. Families of the dead contacted Melissa. One woman sent a photo of her aunt she'd lived in a hamlet near Quang Binh. She recognized the girl in the white dress. Her name was Mai Tran, 10 years old, loved painting, hated storms. Her brother's name was Bin. He died holding her hand. I stared at their names for hours and wept for the first time in decades. Prescott went on the defensive immediately, called it a malicious smear, said I was mentally unstable, accused Melissa of foreign collusion. He pulled out every play in the book. But then came Ortega, out of nowhere. He released a video, frail, sick, but determined. "I was there," he said. "Thomas McLean isn't lying. We buried this for too long. I can't die with it still on my chest." Then Doc Hartley, then others. Testimonies trickled in, then flooded. Congress announced a formal review of Prescott's service. The VA opened an internal investigation. Journalists found redacted reports matching our coordinates. FOIA requests poured in. They couldn't bury it anymore, because this time the truth had faces, had names, had legs. I always thought the truth would feel lighter once I spoke it. But it didn't. Not right away. After the broadcast, after the confessions and the testimonies started rolling in, there was no applause. There were threats, emails telling me to disappear, anonymous notes shoved under my door. One morning, I found a dead crow on my porch, its wings broken, its body still warm. Someone wanted me quiet again, but I wasn't 17 anymore. I wasn't Private McLean trembling behind a locked jaw while the jungle burned. I was a man who had spent half a century paying rent on a silence that never belonged to me. I had already buried too many ghosts. I wasn't going to bury the truth. Melissa stayed by my side through it all. She had been fired from the Gazette 3 days after the story dropped. She didn't care. "If I wanted a safe job, I'd be selling insurance," she said with a smirk. She was the first person who ever looked me in the eye and said, "You did the right thing, Tom." And I believed her. The turning point came on a Tuesday, a national outlet. One of the big ones that had once called us too volatile ran a segment titled "Ghosts of Quang Binh, the Massacre America Ignored." They showed footage from my interview spliced with declassified documents, satellite images, and clips of Prescott over the years spouting words like honor and duty. They even used the photo of Mai in her white dress. And suddenly the nation gasped. Calls flooded into the Senate. Veterans marched outside Prescott's office. Young people who had never even heard of Quang Binh before were making hashtags trend globally. The Pentagon released a statement calling the accusations concerning. Prescott panicked. He held a press conference flanked by AIDS flags and forced solemnity. "This is a tragic misunderstanding," he said, gripping the podium. "My record speaks for itself." He expected it to end there. It didn't, because Ortega's video had hit 10 million views. Because Doc Hartley, quiet stoic Hartley, showed up on live TV with his Army Field Journal. Because Melissa found a photograph in the National Archives Prescott, standing in Village 14 on the day of the operation, a cigarette in his hand, and the girl's burning hut in the background. But the real twist, it came from Vietnam. A journalist in Hanoi tracked down an elderly woman, Nguyen Thi Huong, who had survived the massacre. She was 78. She still had burn scars down her left arm. She still remembered the name Prescott because someone had screamed it just before the fire came. She had been hiding in a storage pit with her niece, Mai Tran. Only Mai had run. Nguyen never saw her again. Until Melissa showed her the photo. She wept. And then she flew to America. When she stepped onto U.S. soil, she wasn't just a witness. She was an earthquake. Melissa arranged for a public hearing. It wasn't sanctioned by the government. It didn't need to be. It was held in an open auditorium, streamed live, covered by dozens of outlets now desperate to catch up. Prescott refused to attend, said it was a media circus. I sat on stage next to Nguyen. When she took the microphone, she didn't speak in anger. She spoke with grief, with grace. "You killed my home," she said, her voice trembling. "But you could not kill my memory. And now, You cannot kill the truth." The room fell silent, and then erupted. 3 days later, under mounting pressure, Prescott stepped down. He gave no apology, no explanation, just a resignation letter, cold and calculated. But it didn't matter, because by then the world had already judged him. His face was stripped from campaign posters, his memoirs pulled from shelves. The medals he once wore with arrogance were now symbols of shame. The same uniform he used as armor had become the very thing that condemned him. He thought I would die with his lies, but I lived long enough to bury them. After it all, I returned to Kentucky for the first time in years. Not to hide, to breathe, to sit on the same porch where I once watched fireflies and believed in simple things. The box was gone, burned, but the girl's photo remained framed now above my desk. Next to it, I placed a plaque Melissa had made. It read, "My Tran, 1960 to 1972. You were seen, you were heard, you were never forgotten." I didn't set out to ruin a man. I set out to reclaim a memory, a name, a face. And when it was done, when the cameras stopped rolling and the crowds dispersed and the world moved on like it always does, I found myself standing in a place I never thought I'd return to. Vietnam, 50 years after I left it behind, soaked in smoke and shame. I stepped onto its soil not as a soldier, not as an American, but as a man carrying an apology that had waited too long to be spoken. Melissa came with me carrying only a notepad and a camera. "Just for record," she said, "but mostly for you." Nguyen Thi Huong met us at the airport in Hanoi. She smiled, eyes soft, behind years of sorrow and wisdom. "You're older now," she said in English, rough but warm. "But I remember your face. You were the boy who didn't shoot." I cried, there in the middle of an airport terminal under the humming fluorescents and announcements in a language I once feared I cried like a child. She held my hand, said nothing else. She didn't need to. We traveled to Quang Binh. The village, once cinders and bones, was rebuilt. Different now. Modern. But the trees were the same. The bend of the river, the curve of the hills, the scent of wet soil after rain, it all remembered. Even if the people had changed. We held a small ceremony. Nguyen spoke first, then Melissa, then me. I read from my journal the entry I wrote the night after the massacre, sitting by a stream barefoot and lost. I read it all. The doubts, the guilt, the truth. And then I said her name, my Tran. I was a stranger who failed you. I let fear drown my voice, but I carry you still. And I hope that counts for something. We placed flowers at a stone by the rice fields, her name carved into it by local artists surrounded by white lilies. Children watched us. Some giggled. Some asked questions. They weren't afraid. They didn't know war. And that was the most beautiful part. When we returned to the U.S., the story had changed. Not just Prescott's fall, not just the media storm, but everything. Textbooks started including the massacre at Quang Binh. Universities asked to archive my journal. The VA finally acknowledged PTSD claims tied to suppressed war crimes, and a school in Louisville was renamed after my Tran. But none of that felt like victory. It felt necessary. I gave one final interview. National television. Prime time, clean suit, clear questions. The host asked Mr. McLean, "What do you want now?" I didn't pause. "I want peace." She leaned forward. "Do you feel vindicated?" I smiled. "No. Because vindication implies I was fighting to prove I was right. I wasn't. I was fighting to prove that truth still matters, that silence can't protect the powerful forever. And do you forgive him? That one took longer. Forgiveness, I said slowly, isn't a gift you give the guilty. It's a seed you plant in yourself so your soul doesn't rot with bitterness. And I meant it, because even Prescott behind his lies and medals was just another boy who got lost in the jungle. I never saw him again. Last I heard, he moved to a cabin in Montana, out of public life, out of history's favor. He never answered questions, never apologized. But in the end, it didn't matter, because the story was no longer his. It was Mai's, and Nguyen's, and Ortega's, and mine. In the spring, I started teaching. Not officially, just to a small group of high school kids whose teacher invited me for Veterans Day and asked me back. They didn't want war stories. They wanted honesty, humanity. I gave them both. One kid, James, asked me, "Would you do it all again?" I looked at him, really looked, and said I wouldn't go back, but I wouldn't erase it either. Because if I hadn't walked through hell, I wouldn't have learned how to pull others out. That's the thing about war. It teaches you everything too late. But if you survive, if you somehow crawl out with your heart intact, you owe the world a version of the truth. Not for closure, for clarity. And so now I live quietly, in a modest home with a dog named Luther and shelves full of letters from people I'll never meet. Some thank me, some curse me, but all of them say the same thing. You made us look again, and that's more than I ever hoped for. The last thing I do every night is stand on my porch and watch the stars. One of them I like to think is Mai, still watching, still waiting, and this time, finally, not alone. The truth took 50 years to surface, but it didn't drown. It waited inside a wooden box, a soldier's trembling hands, and a little girl's forgotten name. This wasn't just my story. It was Mai's. It was Nguyen's. It was every voice silenced by war, by politics, by fear. And in the end, it taught me something simple, something painful, and something powerful. Silence protects the powerful, but truth protects the soul. If this story moved you, if it made you question what's hidden behind the headlines, then don't let it fade into the noise. Subscribe to our channel for more untold stories that challenge what we think we know. Leave a comment below. Tell us how this story affected you. Share it. Let Mai's name be spoken again. Because remembrance is resistance. And every view, every voice brings us one step closer to justice. Thank you for listening. Never stop asking. Never stop seeking.